Black Rifle coffee, baby. Freedom fuel.
Est-ce que vous comprenez le français?
Bien sûr.
J'ai parlé le français un peu.
Un peu, huh?
Yeah. So, the most interesting question that I have is, seeing what you've seen, especially in the early 1960s, and we'll get into your career, but tell me in detail because fear is a heck of a motivator, and going into a combat situation or a kinetic situation, especially in the jungle, the way you interpret it can be a wide variety of things. But the first time you were truly scared, what did that feel like? And what were you doing?
Well, probably we used to defend villages, and this is one of our, especially at night. And I can remember a couple of incidents where you really got afraid. And one of them, we were defending a particular village, and usually there was an A-team, Special Forces A-team helping the village. They were down in the village. And what they would do is they had a tea of tin cans with rags in them. And then if they were, the Viet Cong were coming in at one direction, they would point the tea, and then we would come in and lay ordnance down.
Right.
However, what you have to understand is there's not a lot of lights over the jungle. So you have a village here, there's a few lights there, and it's hilly country, and you're making bombing runs at low level. So we had C-47s come in. We were flying B-26s. They had C-47s dropping flares. And I can remember one incident that even though rounds were hitting the airplane, that didn't scare me for whatever reason. I can't, first of all, I was 22, so, you're going to live forever and you're impervious. But I can remember the flares going out, and they all went out prematurely. So we were below the tops of these hills around the village, and you don't see them at all. There's nothing. And you're going to pull up, and you're pulling up, and it's a wing and a prayer that you don't hit one of those hills. And that's probably my scariest thing. The other one was flying over part of Vietnam, and I can remember that something went wrong with the fuel system. And so we were flying maybe at 1,500 feet. If we didn't come back with brush in the gear, they said we were flying too high. So anyway, we were flying along, and all of a sudden it went from engine roar to absolute silence, which means the engines had both stopped. And it was just fuel. So we quickly got them started again. But that woke you up very quickly. Right. Here you are. And B-26s don't fly they're not gliders.
No.
So when the engines go out, they're going to go down pretty fast.
Well, yeah, I can imagine you're below the horizon, in the jungle at night. Your stall speed is how fast are you moving?
Well, we're probably going about 250
to
300, depending on. And the stall speed's 160, 170.
Okay. So you're moving about as slow as you can go.
Yeah.
Right. And then you've got to pull up in order to miss.
And you're relying on these flares. They would drop a row of flares in order to guide the attack airplanes. But if they all went out prematurely, it was really dark. There wasn't starlight or city lights, or there was nothing. So it was just pitch black. And eventually you'd pull up, and once you got above the hills, you maybe see some horizon.
Right. Well, at that time, so let's go back. First and foremost, did you want to fly? Did you want to be in aviation? Is that what you wanted to do when you kind of embarked on the adventure? Or
I don't
was
think
it
I
more,
really even gave it that much thought.
You didn't?
You know,
Why? So what? So tell me how you made the decision.
I soloed when I was 16.
You did?
Yes. So I started flying very young, and then I applied to get in as a pilot. Mm-hmm. My eyes didn't pass, so I went in as a navigator.
Right.
And I wanted to be an officer. I thought that was going to be my career, was an officer. So I went through what they called, I had 2 years of college, and then I went to the aviation cadet program. Mm-hmm. So I went through flight training. When you graduate from flight training, you're also commissioned. So I got my commission. I was just shy of 21 when I got my commission as a second lieutenant. And I thought this was going to be my career.
Right.
After being in the military, at least through the Air Commandos, which was the group I eventually became part of, I started to see it as a big bureaucracy.
Yeah.
And I frankly got bored.
Yeah.
So
how long did that take?
Yeah, well, I got out of the military when I was 26.
Okay. Yeah.
So I had just made captain, and I was looking at the rest of my career, and I said, I don't want to do this for another 10 years. I want to do something more intellectually challenging. So what I did is I said, what do I want to do next? Mm-hmm. I said, okay, I had my undergrad degree, and I said, well, let's look at graduate degrees. And the interesting way how things turn, they had the graduate records exam for the MBA program and the LSAT for the law school.
Right.
Both, and I was stationed in Panama at the time. Mm-hmm. The LSAT came up first. So I took the LSAT, and from there on, I went to basically resigned my commission and went to law school.
Where'd you go to law school?
Duquesne University.
Okay. And so if we go back, you go into the Air Commandos, which, did you know anything about it before you?
No, they were recruiting. I had been flying cargo for about a year as a second lieutenant,
right,
as a navigator, and the Air Commandos had been recruiting through different squadrons, and they came on base and they interviewed me, and then they offered me a place, and I said, I don't, flying cargo was boring as hell.
Right, yeah.
So this sounded a lot more interesting. So
what was their pitch like? Like, what were they pitching?
I don't even remember.
You don't?
No,
yeah.
I don't remember their pitch, but I know it sounded much more interesting.
Yeah.
And to do something that was really meaningful.
Yeah. Did you know by going there you were going to end up in Southeast Asia? Was there something going on at the time?
It was unspoken, but pretty much we knew.
Right.
I knew that that most likely the first tour of duty with the commandos would have been in Southeast Asia.
So when you got to Southeast Asia, it was 1962 or 1961?
62.
62? Mm-hmm. What was there? Like, because it's 62, this is before the official...
Well, we had a runway, which was PSP, pure steel planking, which with the rains, you know what it was.
Yeah.
It was mud puddle after mud puddle. And we had tents that we stayed in. The air crew stayed in the tents. Mm-hmm. And I look back now and I realize it wasn't hidden, but it wasn't out there as a military installation.
Right. So were you guys in Vietnam, or was it in like Thailand or?
No, at that point we were in Benoit,
okay,
which was it was a Vietnamese base that we were our squadron was, and we had mixed aircraft. We had B-26s, which were the combat. We had L-28s, which were basically a light plane,
right,
which for spotting, and then we had C-46s and 47s. And they were used mostly for infiltration, exfiltration of either special forces or groups that we didn't ask too many questions who they were.
Yeah, because I've only read about it, obviously, and I've talked to some Vietnam veterans from that era. It seemed like there was a very heavy paramilitary, CIA, special forces with air support footprint. But was it confusing or chaotic, or did you?
No, it wasn't chaotic. In fact, it was very effective.
Really?
It suppressed the bad guys very well. And with a minimum amount of investment, we could have probably suppressed it indefinitely. It was only when they tried to Americanize the war, at least from hindsight, looking back, I think that was the problem. When you start to Americanize the war, and you wound up with the bureaucracy of, and especially once LBJ got in there and tried to run everything from the White House, it all fell apart.
Yeah, it's interesting because I saw the same thing in Afghanistan, where a small special operations footprint with lower international media visibility and we'll say a high degree of individual latitude.
Exactly. Yes.
It can be very effective.
It can be effective.
Yeah.
And, there was no reason to pull people out of even Afghanistan from my perspective of Vietnam. It's the same thing all over again. With a footprint of maybe 5,000 people. We have what, 50,000 in Germany after the war. I mean, so, and basically you don't have to do a lot. And all of a sudden you go a long time with no casualties and everything because it's all suppressed.
So this is 1962. Where were you? This has to be, I'm just like putting together timelines, but where were you during the Cuban Missile Crisis? Do you remember? Because you had to be in, right?
I'm not sure when that happened but that was under Kennedy. So that was the same period. And I remember, in fact, I know that, and I remember when they tried to send Cuban expats to go back in, and they were using B-26s. And then basically Kennedy chickened out. And didn't support the whole thing. The Cuban Missile Crisis, I don't really recall where that was in the timeline.
Yeah, because Bay of Pigs. And I'm just going to construct the timelines because that was moving around the same time, and then obviously, when he was assassinated, you had to kind of like have key moments when you're in the military and the president is assassinated.
I remember when he was assassinated. I was in the commandos, but I was out of Vietnam by then.
You were still in the commandos, but you're out. Where were you at?
I don't know if that's when I went to South America.
Okay, right. Because I can't imagine, obviously we've seen the assassination attempts on President Trump, a couple of them now, but I can't imagine living at a time when the president was actually assassinated and thinking, what's the United States in the turmoil at that time? It had to be.
I think I was removed from that. First of all, I was quite young.
Yeah, right.
I look back. Of course, I didn't think of myself as young. But I can remember even when I got out of the military, and I was just, I was barely a captain for a year and a half, and but I didn't think of. I thought of myself as an adult, but I came to realize I wasn't yet. I really wasn't a mature adult yet. And it was probably sometime after law school that I started becoming more mature in my attitudes towards things. Well, I remember my military as part of my youth.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I think I have different sections in my life where I think back on it and I'm like, that was.
Well, you were in longer than I was, so you were there as a mature man. I wasn't.
I was he's an infantry guy, and that's kind of like my youth, right? And then I've kind of graduated. I don't know if I graduated or not, but like when you're thinking about Vietnam and when you're living through the 60s, you obviously, 1962 to 1972, there's a huge shift in the way Vietnam is not only perceived, the way it's fought, the way it's perceived. What's happening in you're in the military for part of that, you're in law school, and then obviously you're out into the professional world. Was there an evolution of the way that you were thinking about Vietnam during that time, or has it shifted? Has it evolved?
Not really.
No?
I mean, my biggest takeaway is the opportunity to really keep a stable country there was just, it was really political decisions that were wrong, just flat wrong, that killed not the military.
Right.
It wasn't a military loss, it was a political loss. One of the things I always chuckle about, at least I was savvy enough to realize that the press was not our friend, because they had, I remember talking to people, reporters, they were always at the base, and they were talking about what they were going to write and all that, and they wanted to talk to us and all that. And then we'd read what they wrote, and they said, didn't you talk to us? But you remember what we said?
Right.
And it was just chalk and cheese. It was completely different. And it was then I started to realize that the press was part of the problem, is that they had preconceived notions, and the stuff that when it finally got printed was nothing like what really was happening. So basically the American public got misled, and the government helped that too, for whatever reason. Yeah.
Thinking back on it, because I think 1968, it's, the riots, and there's this is a culture clash between World War II vets and the Vietnam era. But you had this really big division in I think culturally, at least from a guy that's just reading about it. Like, could you feel it? Could you see it when you were living through it?
I did feel when I got back was the anti-military feeling, after My Lai, everybody all the military that came back were accused of being baby killers.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff. I don't remember, it didn't bother me, but I was wondering, where is that coming from? Where's that generalization about the American military doing stuff? I mean, yeah, it happened, but it was one incident.
Right.
Just one incident. And you're always going to have those kind of things happen. It's war.
It's war.
Yeah. Bad things happen. And some people do go off the rails. But it's not the bulk of people. Most people do their job professionally. And, basically it's just like World War II. Germans wanted to be captured by Americans because they knew fundamentally they'd be decently treated.
Right.
And I think Americans are that way, by and large.
Yeah.
And the broad brush calling the American military something they're not is not healthy for us. It's not healthy for this country.
No, I couldn't agree more. I think the American military and the individuals that serve, and the servicemen and women, at times they take on the brunt of anger and frustration that the politicians have actually made the decisions for some of this.
It was created by the politicians, not by the military.
Not by the military. They're mission focused. They're selflessly serving their nation most of the time.
Yes.
And when I say most of the time, of course, right, this is just human population. There are different narratives and different motivations. But my frustration, I don't know, interested to hear your point of view. One of the things that war taught me more so than anything else was that I have a massive degree of skepticism for the big political machine that makes the decisions to send servicemen and women overseas. I have a lot of frustration with big bureaucratic institutions, with fraud, waste, and abuse. And I see a lot of inefficiencies. I came back from Afghanistan. We were losing, from an estimate on just one pass, on one of our estimates on just the logistics coming in, we're losing about $30 million a month of equipment coming in over the Pakistani border and Afghanistan to support the war effort. And I couldn't help but think, it's taxpayer dollars. These are things that can be going to schools and roads or keeping in somebody's pocket. Did you ever, how did war or serving, how did it shift into your political views or Like, how did you think about the war effort?
Well, I think one of the biggest takeaways you wind up is that bureaucracies in and of themselves become more or less efficient the bigger they get.
Right.
If you go back with military history of America, in World War, if you look at World War II, if you were a base commander, you bought all the stuff you needed for the base. So you needed a hammer, you went down to the local hardware store and you bought a hammer.
Right.
If you needed a vehicle, you went to a car dealership and made a deal. All of a sudden, that was in the Pentagon, and you had all these people. You paid 3 times or 5 times what that hammer or car is worth, because now it's military spec.
Right.
And then there's a huge bureaucracy for testing. It's, all added, all that. And is the stuff better? I doubt it.
Right.
I doubt it. I understand when you start being sophisticated weapon systems, you probably have to have some expertise. But where are you more likely to find it? Are you going to find it in the Pentagon, a guy pushing paper, or are you going to find it in an engineer sitting in one of those companies?
Right.
It's not a cut and dried thing.
Yeah. Checks
and balances, yes. QC, yes. But these bureaucracies build up, and they get in their own way. And I think that carries on. I think it colored my view of big government. It's the same thing. The bigger it gets, the more unwieldy it gets. And even with the best will, it becomes inefficient. So you do wind up wasting money and not being effective in getting something done, actually getting done, because the process becomes more important than the result.
That's well said. The process becomes more important than the results. When you graduate from law school, where do you go from that point in your life?
I practiced law for 20 years in Los Angeles.
In Los Angeles?
Right.
Then how do you find your way back to Europe?
Well, what happened was one of my clients was an international company, publicly traded, but based in London.
Okay.
And I did deals for them, international deals. And one of the deals was some joint ventures, one in Russia, one in China. And they said, would you like to run them? And at that point, I was like 51, 50. And Stephen, who you know very well, he was off to the university. So we were, for the first time, we were empty nesters. And the job was based in London. And so I left the practice and decided to join the corporate world.
I kind of compare and contrast a lot of things in that I'd like to get your perspective on it, because you're younger, you're in the military, you've done very highly chaotic and stressful things. Then you move into a corporate environment where you have complex problems that you're trying to solve, and the pressure of compare and contrast of those things. Like, where in your career have you found yourself at kind of the end of your capacity? Meaning, like
corporate, much more so. Multiple. I mean, you have just doing the business, but then you have the internal politics, and between all of that, it's highly stressful. Because I tend to be goal-oriented. All through my career, I was always goal-oriented. I want to get stuff done.
Right.
And when I see something not getting stuff done, I feel pressure.
Right.
Because my goal is to get something done, whatever it is, to get it done. And I like to think that I've always been successful in getting stuff done.
Well, give me some advice. I give everybody some advice. Yeah, I've gotten this question a few times, but I mean, you've got lots of reps, a lot more than I do. When you find yourself at the end of capacity with, no energy, nothing left, like where and how do you keep moving it forward?
Well, the first thing is have more faith in yourself. You will find that if you really have a goal, you will find the way to get it done. What most people suffer from, and that's the vast majority that I've come in contact with, their problem is not being able to punch through. Their problem is they don't have something to punch through to. They've never really set goals for themselves. I need to do this and keep going. And when you don't hit the goal when you think you should, you put your head down and say, okay, and just keep going. And that's kind of a mental discipline. Is just you have to keep goal oriented. And most people do not set goals. They don't they just don't go set goals at all. They just go and they kind of react to stimuli that's in their surroundings. So even if they're working at a job, it's, and this is what bureaucracies are made of, people like that.
Yeah.
I don't have a goal. It's just when piece of paper A comes up my thing, I know I have to do X, Y, and Z with it and then put it in the out basket.
Right.
But that's not a goal.
No.
That's not a goal.
Right.
And unfortunately, that's what makes them ineffective. Most bureaucracies I would say all bureaucracies, to some degree, are ineffective.
So having a diverse set of skills and a combination of professions through your life, and we were talking earlier, you told me you were sailing for how many years?
Well, I started sailing when I was 11 years old at summer camp, and I just continued that through my life, and I've done round the world.
Really?
Yeah. I didn't do the whole race, but I did a portion of around the world. And then I did, when I retired, I did cruising too.
Yeah. With
my wife, we would bareboat charter. And then we'd cruise. I did the Kadenacy Islands in Greece. I did coast of France. I did Corsica and Sardinia. So I'd charter a boat, usually about 50 foot. And my wife's a good sailor, so both of us, we could handle a 50-foot boat by ourselves, sailboat.
Yeah.
And then I was a member of the Saint-Tropez Yacht Club.
Right.
It's actually Société Nautique de Saint-Tropez. Anyway, but there I joined a crew, and I was on the foredeck from the time I retired to basically I was in 70, 71. I can't remember exactly when I did my last race. And I was on the scampering, putting up spinnakers and stuff on a racing crew. And I raced probably almost every weekend during the winter months. The Med pretty much shuts down racing during the summer. And the reason for that is the sometimes boaters have vacation and they're going every which way. They don't know the rules of the road.
Right.
So it's best to get off the water and just let them have it.
Just let them have it. So did you have a boat in L.A. too? Were you sailing when you were in Los Angeles? Did you have a?
I went through we had two boats during a small. I had a 30-foot, then I had a 46-foot cutter sailboat.
So would you go out and
I
sailed
sailed up to Seattle.
And,
really? Yeah. And we used to sail to the islands, raise the kids. We had a 30-foot boat at that time. We raised the kids on the 30-foot boat.
Really?
By taking every weekend, we'd go to Catalina, drop a hook, and just let them loose. They could do anything where are they going to go?
Right. Yeah.
Just an island. So that was how they grew up.
Was that, I think about this because I have a few friends that get into this, and they can get into it in a very inexpensive way, or they can be as expensive as you really want to get it. But I find it fascinating because from an individual confidence perspective, like getting on a boat, getting on the ocean, and then, taking your family in a obviously in a vehicle on the ocean, that can be psychologically daunting for somebody that's like not confident in their skill set. You have to be
confident in your skills to be able to repair anything that breaks. And then you have to know how to sail. Well, as I said, I started when I was 11, so my sailing skills were fairly good.
Right.
And I didn't mind crewing or skippering, so I did both.
How long does it take to get proficient enough where you feel you're really confident to solve the problems that will be thrown at you?
Pretty much you have... I would say it's probably better. You're going to get them faster if you have your own boat.
Right.
Because you wind up doing things on the boat. There's always a repair to do. And so you're learning a lot of stuff how to take care of that can go bad when you're at sea. So You just have to learn those things. And the more you sail, the more you get confident because you're going to hit bad weather, et cetera.
Right.
And when you go through them, I can handle this.
Yeah.
I know what to do. You can read about it, but that's not going to do it. You actually have to go through it. So, you know how to furl everything. So if you're in heavy weather, you can do it.
I find it interesting from an individual perspective where are you 80? Is that
86?
86? Okay, that's a bigger number than I thought. That's incredible. Like, because you're incredibly you're on the ball, especially more so than I think our current sitting president, which isn't hard, by the way. Sorry, that's not a compliment.
That's not a high bar.
That's not a high bar. But you have an encyclopedia information that you've obviously been introspective and thought about this from a context of you've been able to do a lot. And I think there are the ounces that equal pounds in your life that you have to have been like referencing through, I would say 70 years at least, where you keep coming back to what pushes you and drives you to be in this category of people that have achieved this much.
The key thing is I've always looked at life as an adventure. So, and if I had one ultimate goal, is always to keep having adventures. And I looked at when I went and started opening up countries with the whole thing, I look as an adventure.
Right.
Meet new people, et cetera. I had to interface with locals because our workforce in each of those countries, they weren't Brits or Americans. They were whatever. I used Russians in Russia, Chinese in China, and Indians in India.
Yeah.
So most of the staffs there were indigenous people. But again, it's all part of the experience. I tend to be like a sponge. I get that. And I was, my wife's going to come up with her 79th birthday, and we were talking about is that we've had an adventure, and it isn't over yet.
Right.
I don't know what's next, but it doesn't matter because it's going to be an adventure.
Yeah, it doesn't.
It's going to be an adventure.
When you've raised a family, you've stayed married. How long have you been married?
Not next year, but the year after that will be our 50th.
Okay. So as a guy that wants to stay married for an extended period of time, I need you to help me out as far as like the keys to success that you've actually acquired over the last 50 years.
Basically, we talk to each other.
Yeah.
And and that's something that going into the marriage, she understood looking for adventure. And she didn't come from that background. She was a small town girl. She was living in Phoenix, and that was a big move because that's not how she grew up. She grew up in a small mining town. But she's always been open to the adventure. And we do the adventures together. And I think that's why we're together.
Right. And then your kids, and you have three.
Right?
And so raising them, do you have consistent pieces of information and or things that you're really trying to emphasize in them as they were growing up?
I think one of the things we tried to impart to them as they grew up, first of all, is personal responsibility. You are the architect of your life, not us.
Right.
We'll give you the tools, but we're not going to tell you how to live. And the second thing is we think it's better to look at life as an adventure.
Right.
And enjoy everything, even the down moments. But it's just part of the adventure. I think if more people lived that life, they'd be a lot happier. Instead of looking for things to be upset about.
Yeah, I've kind of, I think about things a lot and I have to shift my mentality where, instead of looking at the negative out of something, I'm looking at it from this is a complex problem that I have the opportunity to solve. And if it's presenting itself, then it's it's a challenge.
Exactly. It's a challenge that you have to overcome. And that is the quintessential definition of adventure. You're constantly solving problems.
So you came back and you were in France for how long? 10 years?
We were there 15 years.
Okay. what do you miss about living in France? Like, what are the things?
The food.
Yeah.
I find most of the produce in America tasteless. It looks pretty, looks bright red, bright green,
right,
but has no taste. I'm used to shopping there. You shopped in little markets, and it was picked that morning by the local farmer.
Right.
We used to buy our goat's cheese from a goat herder.
Right.
He'd come into the village and had a little stand that was maybe smaller than this desk, and ice underneath it to keep it cool, and you would buy it. There was no government stamps or anything. Right. You could just buy the cheese he made. They were much more interesting food.
Yeah.
My butcher made his own bacon.
Right.
And hung it in the shop. So there was bacon hanging on the hooks all over, and he would tap them to see if they were dry enough for him to put on the blade to cut the bacon strips. I mean, it's that culture I like.
Do you think that living in a foreign country for that long, learning a different language, do you think that it's increased your intellectual capabilities or extended them? Do you think it's made you better?
I think it can. I think not everybody does that.
Yeah.
I know when I was in the military, which was one of the big disappointments, is one of the things I would go to a country with, let's say, an air crew, and they would run to the officers' club, and they would have an American steak. It doesn't matter where you were, they'd have everything.
Right.
I wanted to go into the village, and I didn't care what it was. I wanted to have something local, just because I said this is part of the adventure.
Yeah.
I want to learn something new. So that's the way I always approach things. And my wife the same way. And hopefully we've given it to the 3 kids.
Right. Yeah. I think it's for me, when I'm out of the country, and I spent most of my life, or the last decade, I guess, before I started the business, and different places. But then I find when I go to those places, especially new language, new, everything's new. And my brain feels like it gets fatigued just by the fact that it's not the same thing as you're moving through your day. And this, I don't want to call it a rut, because that's not what it is, but it's almost like you're on autopilot. And then when you shift into a different culture, new language, new roads, new everything, it forces you to think in a different way.
I think it can be, but it's how you approach it.
Right.
And I remember I've met lots of people who don't approach it that way and gain nothing from the experience.
Yeah.
Hopefully I've gained from it.
Right.
Because it's I want to see those new things. I want to, and it becomes part of me. A lot of the people don't.
Yeah.
And I think that same mind is what you find in bureaucracies. Well, they want the sameness. It's comfortable.
Yeah. What brought you into politics? Why did you want to make a shift from coming back to the United States and then getting into
the reality
politics?
was I saw what was happening in America. And it was actually America I didn't recognize. I have to be honest. When I came back, it was very difficult for me to see this is what America has become, and I realized how much things had changed, and not for the better.
Right.
And especially I look at some of the youth, and I'm saying they're going down a path that I know what the end of this is because I've seen it. I've been there. I mean, I was in Russia.
Right.
So when I was building the factory, I actually took a flat there, and my wife and I lived there for 2 years while I built the factory.
Where at?
Moscow. I lived in downtown Moscow.
Wow.
Lived a Russian life. Okay, I had a driver or a bodyguard. But at the end of the day, I saw what the thinking that's now invading the United States, where the ultimate result is. And I'm not talking about the bad things that they do outside the country. I saw what it did to the country itself.
Right.
The lack of consumer goods, the grayness of all. I was there actually when the White House, meaning the Russian White House, which was the parliament, fell, and Yeltsin was on the tank
You were
I
there?
was in Moscow when that happened. And that was the end of the Soviet Union.
Right.
Soviet Union was no more, and the Russian Federation became its own country. And the change was visible. It was like dramatic. I'm talking about in 24 hours.
Right.
And the things you saw for the first time, women wearing lipstick and makeup, young boys and girls holding hands in the street. I mean, it was just all of a sudden, it was like all of this repressed life just exploded. I think it's regressed back to that same thing. It's not communist anymore. I don't know what it is. I don't think they know what it is. But it's more like it's an oligarchy.
Yeah.
So but at the end of the day, that's the thing that made everything not work.
Right.
Because everything was bureaucratic. Your life was bureaucratic. And the process became everything. And it was gray. It was a gray life. So if I learned nothing else, when I came back here, I saw that infiltrating America because it was safe.
Well, do you think that the majority of what I would say is Americans that are open to socialism, do you think they actually know what it means?
No. They can't. They do not know where it leads.
Right.
They don't know. Never mind the horrors. Because let's say, even for argument's sake, let's say we can ameliorate those horrors. It is still a terrible way to live because it's gray. Just say that's the best way I can describe it. It's a gray life. Everything you do, say, get is dictated by a bureaucracy. Where you live, what you read, what you see on TV, everything is regulated. If you look at what's happening, I don't know if you saw Kerry's speech. I forget where he was talking. But he said, we have to do something about the First Amendment because we can't have all this misinformation out there, meaning anything I don't like is misinformation.
Right.
And I said, okay, that's bad, and it leads to a bad place. But the reality is, can you imagine how to live when you only hear one side of everything? And it's everywhere. And it's a very dull life. It certainly isn't not an adventure anymore. No. But the youth are buying into this, some of them. The interesting thing is, I'm kind of a stats guy. We're looking at where the youth are registering. They're registering as neither Democrat or Republican. They're registering now as no party preference.
Right.
That's the major place where they are going. So maybe the light's starting to come on.
Do you think the two-party system is, give me your thoughts on just the two-party system in general.
I don't think whether it works or not works is really the right question. The alternatives are the two-party system, which means that gradations within, let's say, the right and the left have to be accommodated within those coalitions. In other words, the right and the left become single coalitions. You have conservative coalition and a liberal coalition. In most parliamentary, you wind up with multiple parties. So some are extreme and some aren't, and some are center and then center right, and they have to form coalitions to form governments. If they're allowed to function, they both work. I think what we've had in America is we used to have coalitions in both parties. We're getting away from that. Is that both parties seem to be,
It's all right.
Both parties seem to be governed right now. The parties structure themselves by the extremes within that coalition. And what happens is that means both parties are going to start shrinking. And that's why you now have in Nevada and other states, 40% are registered to no major party. I don't know what the national numbers are, but it's approaching the same number throughout the whole country. So people are getting disaffected from belonging to either party.
Do you think that lends itself to the opportunity of a third party then?
No, not really.
No?
Because that's not how you form coalitions.
Mm-hmm.
The way we govern is one party or the other has to be in charge of the legislature.
Right.
And that's where the laws are made. So either one party is a majority party or it isn't.
Right.
So you get a third party, you just make it more complicated.
Mm-hmm.
Now, some countries have multiple parties, but they've learned to adapt that. You couldn't switch to that quickly. If you wanted to do that, it would take probably a couple of generations to move to that and have strong enough parties. The British used to have a party, the Lib Dems. Well, they've never really been able to get enough where they're the dominant party in a coalition. Usually it's been Liberal or the Tories. In France, it's just the opposite. In France, the major party, the one that's now are, let's say, coalitions of chance almost. So when Macron ran, he formed his own party and then brought other parties within his coalition. I'll turn that off. I'm sorry.
It's all right.
I've done this before on the radio. Forgot to do it. But so they both can work. I think what the U.S. has to do is both parties have to reestablish their real coalitions. You have to understand that most, even within the coalitions, you're going to have those extreme voices. They need a place to voice, but the last place you want them is governing. It can't be. We can't be 51% dictates to the rest, the 49%, how the country goes. That's a very dangerous place to be.
Well, because you essentially have the country divided, right?
You wind up with a divided country, and that's not going to function.
No. Yeah. Where do you see it now as far as, like, I know that you're I mean, you can explain your background as far as, like, what...
Well, I served as the county chair
within
the Republican Party for 3 terms in Nevada. And then I left that to become, I formed my own PAC. But the PAC specializes only in working on legislative races, because what we want to do is get a more center-right government. We have a Republican governor, but both houses of the legislature are controlled by the Dems, and it's not healthy. We wind up at loggerheads, or we don't pass anything. And if we get a trifecta, which means all 3 are with the Dems, they tend to do very silly things. Just look at California.
Yeah, right.
They just do silly things. I mean, forget about whether you're right or left. A lot of the public policies of California are just destructive. They're just destructive to the state itself.
Yeah,
need more balance.
Well, I've thought about this in the last several years, which is, California, we'll just say for conversation's sake, it's the measurement, roughly the 7th largest economy in the world, I think.
It usually is somewhere in that.
Somewhere in that.
Plus or minus 1, I think it is.
And I don't think that if the state was not so resource rich and it was not so beautiful, because I think it does have, like, probably some of the best atmosphere as far as terrain in the United States. But if you couldn't apply California politics to Ohio, because they wouldn't work. They're too destructive, and the economy isn't
not
as
working
big.
in California. Right. Businesses are leaving.
Yep.
It's probably the leading state of population decrease. People, even with their weather and everything else, as you've mentioned, going for them, people are still leaving. Major companies are leaving. And one of the things people don't understand about large corporations leaving, that doesn't happen overnight. Mm-hmm. A lot of them have 20-year leases on their facilities. So they're waiting for the lease to run, and then they're gone.
Right.
So even when they put these crazy things in, then they turn around and say, nobody left. I said, no, wait 10 years. And then
Right.
all of a sudden you find you have this drain of large corporations that are gone along with their employment.
Right.
So what you're winding up with is a very skewed population. You're going to want, and it's exacerbating over time. You have very, very rich who they have ways of ameliorating the effect of the tax, and then you have very poor, and that big chunk in the middle is disappearing because there's no jobs for them. Life's too expensive there. Both, it's the highest gasoline. Housing is ridiculous. And eventually that's all going to implode. It will implode. Now, when it happens, I don't think anybody can accurately predict this, but it will implode at some point. And remember, unlike cities, states cannot go bankrupt.
Right.
So which means the debt stays with that state. So they're either bailed out or they can never raise a bond issue. And that means, and their tax base is gone. So they can't raise bonds and they have no tax base. How do they provide services? And the biggest fear is if you wind up with a Democrat in the White House and controlling Congress, they try to bail out the state.
Right.
The only way to do that is to nationalize the state. And I don't think we want that in the thing. In other words, you won't have a state anymore.
Right.
It will not be a state.
No. What do you think, like, from a destructive policies in the last, we'll say 3 decades, more, we could go back even if we wanted to, but what has directly contributed to the decrease in what we call the middle class, and what are the policies from your perspective that have led to that?
I think it's the de-emphasis of the family. Is that if you take to the black community, it's all the benefits that give to unwed mothers. And it sounds like a good thing. It sounds like a generous thing. Let's take care of unwed mothers. But what's the result of that policy? And it's over time. It doesn't happen immediately. And now you have like 60%, I think the number is 60% or maybe higher, of black children are born to single mothers. Well, you've subsidized it. What do you think's going to happen? It's that, and that's destructive to the family. But there are other things that have been destructive, is where we've outsourced so much of what middle-class Americans used to do and make. So we've skewed the workforce where there's not those kinds of jobs anymore. We've de-emphasized them. We don't treat them with respect anymore. Everybody wants to go to college. Why? I'm not saying we shouldn't have colleges, but this thing whereas you're nobody unless you went to college, and what do most of them do? They take stuff in the humanities that they have no skill set now that they can use in the job market. And yet they think they're entitled to a 6-figure income. So, well, what are you going to do? What can you do for a company? How are you going to make money? I mean, the company's hiring you so they can make money. And they don't even teach them that that's what the education's for. But that starts all the way down in school. They're more interested in teaching cultural things rather than here's your skill set that you need to cope with life. And that's reverberated throughout. I also see, especially when I came back, is the cultural problems. I will say as an aside, I see that ameliorating.
Right.
I think there's pushback, and I'm not talking about old fogies like me. I see it within the youth who are starting to push back on some of this cultural nonsense. This trans and who's in what bathroom and all of this stuff. It's a distraction. Go back to truth, not how you feel. But I think they realize they've been sold a bill of goods. That's why they're registering independent. But it's quiet. See, the thing is, people think, oh no, it's this cultural DEI and all the rest of that stuff. No, it's taking over. Not so much. There's companies now dumping DEI because they realize, look at Boeing. You can't tell me that probably 60, 70% of their QC problem is DEI.
Right.
Because you start hiring without looking at skill sets, qualifications versus this diversity nonsense. I'm never saying discriminate, but the first step, the first criteria is qualifications. That's got to be it. Otherwise, what happens to your product? And what happens then to the company? If you don't produce a good product, and Boeing's on the knife edge right now.
Right.
And it used to be, I ain't going if it ain't Boeing.
Right.
And that's the reputation it used to have.
Yeah.
Not anymore. And I think, I know a couple of the investment houses now are coming off this ESG investing, which is finally waking up that this nonsense this cultural nonsense it wasn't effective.
Right.
It did not produce better goods and a better way of life for people. And that's what it should be. Still, nothing's produced a better way of life and freedom, especially free economy.
Right. Do you find yourself trying to balance any of the, or coalesce any differences between, purely, like we'll call it more of a libertarian position from a capitalist, like free market perspective, and then also social programs that are either brought to the states or by the federal government?
The first thing about social programs, I think social programs and the place they point to that have pretty free economies, but a very expensive social network, for the most part, they're homogeneous populations. They're all Norwegians.
Right.
They're all Swedes.
Mm-hmm.
And when you find they break down, when they have high immigration and you have people who are not Swedes and not Norwegians, then the thing starts breaking down. Now, I think that's a detriment, but as long as you keep the economy free, and by free, I don't mean without regulation.
Right.
Because sometimes you have to have antitrust, but it can't be, what you don't want is a planned economy. And if you get into planned economies, they just don't work. And I think there's been enough trials of that in the world.
Yeah.
And forget about the bad things they had to do just to maintain it, the police states, et cetera, but they just don't work. They keep having to add more and more force, and it still doesn't work.
Right.
So we need an economy that works. We need cultural but when you have culture, what we have now is a very small minority trying to drive culture through the whole body politic, and that just never works. Mm-hmm. Cultures need to evolve, and they have to evolve naturally, not by force.
Right.
And I see too much force being applied to the cultural narratives, especially in the mainstream press. Mm-hmm. And everybody doesn't buy into it. You're a poo-poo head, or you're a pejorative or something.
Right.
And we have to stop you from talking because you're dangerous. Mm-hmm. And why? Why are you dangerous? Because you're saying not what we want you to say.
Right. Which I think is a very slippery slope.
Exactly.
When you're limiting speech, especially from the federal perspective. Mm-hmm. It's a really slippery slope.
Very, very dangerous. And the thing is, the First Amendment does not say you have the freedom of speech, but not to speak lies. There's no caveats. Mm-mm. You're allowed to say lies.
Right.
And other people are allowed to challenge those lies. That's what it's all about. Spirited debate. And if you can't prove your position, but now what they say, they want to be able to say their position without having to prove it, because they know they can't. They can't substantiate most of the stuff they're saying. Mm. They just make it up.
Do you think that this is a part? Do you think this is part of what I would say is the Cold War aftermath from?
Not really.
No?
I think it's a whole new genre.
Yeah.
And I think what it is, and I think as the society gets more educated, et cetera, especially it started with the educators. Mm. And what the educators have convinced themselves is we know best. And once you accept that premise, that fundamental premise that I know best, then it justifies you doing anything. Mm. Because what do you peasants know about how to run your lives? We know better. We'll make you happier, even if we have to kill you to do it.
Right? Yeah, we've seen we've seen examples as to how that works.
Exactly. So everybody will have strawberries for dessert, but I don't like strawberries. You will like strawberries.
You will like it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
and that's their mentality. That's the cultural thing we have to overcome. And the battle is not with the youth; it's with those academics. We need to clean up our higher education learning stuff. But that's already happening.
Yeah,
that's already happening. Fewer and fewer parents now are going to put up money to send them to Harvard or Yale.
Right.
They're going to look for other private schools, Hillsdale or some of them.
Right.
They're going to look for other universities because they don't want their kids indoctrinated. Mm-hmm. And probably, I suspect some of the, I know Yale had a big fall off on endowments. Their alumni usually heavily endow the school. Yeah. And some of them are starting, not so sure this is something I want to invest in. So you're going to look at, I think that's the way it's going to correct.
So when you look back and you think about the pillars or the principles that, we talked a little bit about adventure, living your life with a sense of adventure, but you're obviously well-read and very curious. That's fairly obvious, but what are the things that you've packed around and continued to carry as far as what do you like to read? What do you like to digest intellectually? I
still like political philosophy. Mm-hmm. I read part of my age showing the black guy, the Economist. I really like everything he's read. Conflict of Visions was his main book. Every time I listen to him and he's in his 90s now.
Right.
And he is fascinating. I like him. And then I'll go back and read Rousseau and realize, okay, this is where you went wrong.
Right.
You had Adam Smith and and those principles are still worth rereading. There's another one. There's an American philosopher I read. I can't think of his name. He wrote in the 50s, and he wrote about American conservatism. I'm not a libertarian. Mm-hmm. I think I'm not all the way that men have to be absolutely governed. When I think there has to be self-governance, but the problem we have forgotten, there's two sides to that. Yes, we want to be self-governing, but self-governing means we have to have self-discipline. And I think if one thing we've lost in America is self-discipline, the ability to discipline yourself. Yeah. To feel responsibility for stuff. People, I see little blurbs, even on YouTube, you'll see them, and where you have an employee arguing with a, quote, bad boss, but more of it is being narcissistic. You only hired me for 8 hours a day, so I do work from 8 to... I said, no, you hired to get a job done. I said, there's none of that. I'm responsible. And that's because that requires introspective. If I took the responsibility to get it done, I'm going to get it done.
Right.
And if I get obstacles, I either go through them or around them. But I never lose sight what I want to get done. And I see that going down. Most of the youth don't see that. They don't have a sense of, I'm responsible for me. I'm responsible for my fellow man to a certain degree. I have to be circumspect in my dealing with it. I have to deal honestly with people because that's part of respect. That's part of being responsible. When you deal shadily, you don't care what happens to the other person. It means you're not taking any responsibility for what happens around you. And I don't mean you live for the other person. That's not true either. But you have some responsibility of what you do and how it affects other people. And what I see is a generation growing up with no sense, even responsibility for themselves, is they've had everything handed to them, not had to, my kids grew up having to work. And I didn't do it because I didn't want to give them money. I wanted them to learn how to work, how you had the responsibility for going out there, doing a job for which someone else freely gave you money because what they thought what you're doing was valuable. You learned from that because you learned one of the key lessons. I can do something that other people are willing to pay me for. Well, what does that mean? Your self-worth goes up. And I think what you look at, some of these kids at universities, they have no idea of self-worth. So it's give me, or I'm entitled. But that's not the same thing as I deserve. I'm entitled is different. I'm entitled. I'm just here, so I'm entitled to something. No. Because I deserve means I did something that says I deserve something.
Right.
And that's a cultural value I see deteriorating.
Yeah, it's freedom and accountability, right?
They go together. You can't have one without the other.
You can't.
There is no way you can have one without the other.
You have to take accountability in order. Great freedom takes great accountability. And so when you outsource your accountability to the federal government or the state,
well said.
You're done.
Exactly.
And I see it. I love reading libertarian philosophy and political philosophy at times because it's interesting from a thought process. It's an interesting thing to think about because implemented in its purest form, it wouldn't work. Like it just wouldn't. I mean, it's because of the way the country, especially with all 50 states and how diverse all the individuals are and the culture and the economy. Now, it could, in certain circumstances, I think in very small population and homogenized populations, yes, because it takes an extreme amount of accountability with really high IQ and capacity to implement. Correct. Because not everyone has the discipline to do it. Like they just wouldn't be able to, because and we can see it. We look around the United States and you can see it everywhere. You can say,
one of the things, when I talk about that government's inefficient, and I would not have it any other way. I don't think the solution is making government more efficient. I think the solution is giving less stuff to government to do.
Yeah.
Let people take care of their stuff. And if you have to give it to government, look at the lowest level of government. If you can't give it to a town council to do rather than a state legislature, give it to a state legislature rather than the federal government, and push it down as much as possible, and even limit that to what they can do and not do. And I think so. I don't want them to be efficient, because governments that get efficient become very bad very fast.
very, very bad very fast.
Very fast.
Yeah. I think about it from the tactical perspective in the government, which is having unilateral tactical authority closer to where the problem is always. When I say it's always, it's like if you have competent people that are in charge of a tactical problem, they're closest to the problem, they need to be able to make the decisions like right next to it. And then the more layers you create between the problem that's on the ground and then the decision maker, the more inefficient it becomes, more time it takes, more money.
I'll give you an idea. Right now, there's a lot of the people who are upset with how school districts are run. And their first knee-jerk is, let's go run people, grassroots kind of people, to run for the school board. And what it shows how ignorant they are of how actual stuff works. And I'm only going to speak for Nevada because other states do it differently. But Nevada, and actually most states, especially blue states, the real rules of all schools all the way down are made in the state legislature. And the school boards merely implement laws that are already passed. Their lane is very narrow, and it's circumscribed by the state legislature. And in Nevada, I talked to school board. They came through to the PAC and to the party and wanting our support. We're going to do this. And I said, well, what are you trying to do? Well, we want to change this. I said, it's not going to be decided here. It's over there.
Right.
It's this other legislature call the state legislature that will decide that, because there's statutes. And the statute, you say, all you got to do is look, can a school board pass a statute? No. All it can do is pass resolutions, and what those resolutions do is implement. They can change around the edges, but they can't change the fundamental policy. So if the state government says you must open your bathrooms to trans, school board can't do anything about it. They can't change it.
Right.
And yet most grassroots people who work on that, who don't understand how the system works, they think the school board can change it. And so they put their effort into the wrong place. And a lot of what we do, or I try to do when I'm talking to groups, is look where the problem is. Where can the problem be solved? And a lot of times it isn't where you think it is.
Right.
It's another layer of government. And then you'll have people who are running for the state legislature that talk about stuff that can only be done by Congress.
Right.
And you say, why you want to do that? You get the state legislature, you're not going to be able to do a thing about it. It's going to be Congress. Or vice versa. Some guy wants to run for Congress, and every issue that he's hot on is solved by the state legislature. It's the purview of the state legislature. And so you realize they don't even understand how the system works of the multi-level. So there's a lot we can. I think one of the problems is civics education in schools is non-existent.
Right.
We don't, I think you remember, was a Schoolhouse Rock? For,
Yeah.
What's a bill?
Yeah.
None of that's being taught anymore. So they don't even understand how the system really works.
Yeah, I reference that a lot. Like, they don't understand how a bill becomes a law, right? Then they don't actually understand the difference between the three parts.
The state government, federal government, local government, school boards, and don't even get me started on GIDs. That's a separate entity that's formed under state law, but can tax for a specific purpose, and just adds on to your property tax. And people don't understand that. Well, I'm paying this, and who does that? And you have to know that if you're going to start trying to make changes. But the kids don't. None of the kids. I think if you're shy of 30, you never learned this stuff. You never learned any of the civics in school.
No,
it's not taught. And so what you wind up is you have this general feeling is somebody should give me something because I need.
Right.
And that's pretty much what all these people, I want to have my boobs cut off, so somebody should give me some money to do that. Why? I mean,
why?
Why? And I mean, it's this entitlement thing, and they don't even know from where. They don't care.
No.
It's just I should be getting.
Right.
And why? Because I'm alive and I'm here, so therefore I should get. It's only fair to me. Okay. And there's no sense of, we were talking earlier about that responsibility. Well, okay, you're free, but you have responsibilities too.
Yeah, it's nobody else's responsibility.
What's the Admiral say? Make your bed.
Right.
First thing up, make your bed.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've seen that.
Of course.
And it resonates, and they don't like it when if you refer to them, because they have no response to it.
No.
Because they don't want to take responsibility.
Well, I got to thank you a lot for coming on, like talking to us. We got to get you to the airport, which I definitively appreciate. Hopefully we'll at least, have you back. This
Happy
is,
to do it.
Steve Kadenacy is our CFO, and this is his father. We'll do a full bio in the description of the podcast. Like, if you got anything else that you want to impart on us?
No.
Okay. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.